My name is Nora Jean Callahan. I am 37 years old, and for 10 years, my family told everyone who would listen that I had wasted my education, my potential, and my grandmother's goodwill by moving to Columbus and doing nothing useful with my life. They said it at Easter. They said it at graduation parties for cousins I barely knew. They said it loudly enough at my grandfather's 84th birthday lunch that the whole back room of the restaurant could hear them. Nora just floats around Columbus, never could hold a job. Poor thing. What they did not know, what I had never told them, not once in 10 years, was what I actually did in Columbus. What I did was find things. Specifically, I found the things people tried hardest to hide. Missing assets, hidden accounts, shell companies, forged documents, fraudulent transfers designed to look like generosity and function like theft. I am a licensed private financial investigator. I have been one for 9 years. And the morning my grandfather slipped a folded grocery receipt across the table at Sunday lunch with 3 words written in pencil on the back, everything my family had built on the assumption that I didn't exist came apart. I'm going to tell you all of it, every piece, because my grandfather waited 3 years for me to be ready, and I am not going to waste a single word of what he did. Welcome back to Sweet Payback Stories. If you have ever been the one your family dismissed, the one they talked about at potlucks while you were doing the work that would eventually prove every word of it wrong, this one is for you. No shouting, no drama, just the truth and the paper trail. Drop a comment below and tell me where you're listening from. And subscribe, because this story doesn't end at that Sunday lunch table. It ends in a conference room where every assumption my family made about who I was got corrected in writing with exhibits. Let me take you back to the beginning. I grew up in Millhaven, Ohio, which is the kind of small town that takes genuine pride in knowing its own and genuine suspicion of anyone who seems to think there might be something worth finding outside it. My grandfather, Franklin David Callahan, was 78 years old, and he was the most precise man I had ever known. Retired accountant, 41 years with the same firm in Mansfield. He kept his files alphabetically and his checkbook balance to the cent and his appointments in a paper calendar that he transferred from the old year to the new one every December with the same mechanical pencil, sharpened to the same point, used for nothing else. He and my grandmother Dorothy had built a life the same way, steadily, carefully, nothing wasted. Dorothy died 11 years ago of a fast pneumonia that took her in 18 days, and Franklin had been in the farmhouse on Phelps Road alone ever since, tending the vegetable garden she had kept for 30 years, and doing the crossword every morning at the kitchen table with the same pencil and the same patience. He was my person. He taught me to read a balance sheet at age 12, the way other grandfathers teach grandchildren to fish. He sat beside me at the kitchen table with a legal pad and showed me the difference between an asset and a liability, between income and cash flow, between what a document says and what the numbers underneath it are actually telling you. The document is the story someone wants to tell, he said once. The numbers are the story they can't help telling. I carried that sentence into everything I ever did with my career. My mother, Patrice Callahan, was Franklin's daughter. She was 58, and she had the particular bitterness of a woman who believed she had deserved a larger life than the one she had ended up with, and who had decided, somewhere around her 40th birthday, that the reason she hadn't gotten it was everyone else's fault. She worked part-time at the county assessor's office, processing forms, and she had a talent for making paperwork sound like a sacrifice she was making on behalf of the whole community. My uncle Dennis was Franklin's son, 54, divorced twice, currently operating a landscaping and snowplow business in Millhaven that had the financial structure of a household and the ambitions of a corporation. He drove a new GMC Sierra every other year, leased, and had a habit of borrowing money from Franklin to cover gaps he described as temporary. The gaps were not temporary. My cousin Trevor was Dennis's son, 32, who worked for Dennis's business and who had, in the past 6 years, gradually taken over more and more of the daily management in the way that certain people take over things, not by appointment, but by presence. By being there constantly enough that the original owner stops keeping track. I was the outsider. I had always been the outsider, not because I left, but because I left wrong. I left without a husband and without a job that could be described in a single recognizable sentence, and I went to Columbus and got a graduate degree in forensic accounting, and then disappeared into a profession that my family had no framework for understanding and no interest in developing one. I tried to explain it once, early on, at Thanksgiving during my second year in Columbus. I work in financial investigation, I said. Private sector. I help individuals and companies identify and document financial fraud. My mother looked at me with the expression she reserved for things she had decided were either pretentious or made up. So you look at spreadsheets. Essentially, yes. Franklin looks at spreadsheets, she said, and he worked at an actual firm for 40 years. She turned back to the sweet potatoes. That was the last time I explained it in detail. After that, I said I worked in finance and let the silence do whatever it wanted to do. What I did not say, what I had made a professional habit of not saying, was the specifics of what I found and how I found it. In 9 years, I had worked 93 cases. Missing pension funds located in accounts held by caregiving children. Real estate transferred to family members through forged signatures and outdated powers of attorney. Investment accounts drained through a slow, patient system of small withdrawals designed to stay below the threshold that triggers bank alerts. 61 of those 93 cases involved elderly victims whose family members were the perpetrators. That is not a coincidence. That is a pattern. And I knew that pattern better than I knew my own family's kitchen, which was part of the reason I had not examined my own family's kitchen nearly closely enough for far too long. The mocking was consistent. That is the right word for it. Not occasional, not reactionary. Consistent, in the way that a narrative becomes consistent when a family decides on a story and commits to it across multiple settings and audiences. Nora just floats. That was my mother's version. She said it to the women at her church group, to the cousins at holiday gatherings, to the checkout clerk at the grocery who had made the mistake of asking after her children. Poor Nora never could figure it out. That was Dennis's version, deployed at the 4th of July cookout, at Franklin's birthday lunches, anywhere there was a small audience willing to receive it. She went to college twice and ended up with nothing. Trevor's version, the crudest, offered once at a cousin's graduation party loudly enough that 3 people turned around. I did not respond to any of these. Not because they didn't land. They landed every time, in the specific location, where I had been 7 years old and handing my grandfather a pencil and believing, completely, that the numbers would always tell the truth if you had the patience to read them. I didn't respond because I had been taught, professionally and personally, that the moment you defend yourself is the moment the other person knows where to push. And because I had a rule about my work that I had never broken. The rule was, never tell anyone you're watching until you're ready to show them what you found. My office in Columbus was on the 4th floor of a building on East Broad Street. 3rd door on the right, a brass nameplate that said Callahan Forensic Services, a waiting room with 4 chairs that I had chosen for comfort rather than impression, because the people who sat in them were usually frightened, and frightened people do not need to be impressed. I had 2 full-time associates and 1 part-time research analyst, a licensed private investigator named Marcus who handled the field work when field work was required, and a relationship with 2 attorneys in town who referred cases regularly and trusted me to deliver what they needed in a format that would hold up in court. My caseload averaged 8 active files at any given time. The cases ranged from straightforward, a missing inheritance, an account nobody knew existed, to complex, multi-year schemes that required reconstructing 5 years of financial records from tax filings, cancelled checks, and the kind of documentation that only survives because certain very careful people keep paper copies of everything. The grandfather I learned from was that kind of person. He had never thrown away a bank statement in his life. I thought about that sometimes, sitting at my desk on East Broad Street with a client's financial history spread across 2 monitors. I thought about the woman who had taught me crosswords as a child and the man who had taught me balance sheets, and I thought about the fact that the skills I used every day to protect strangers from the people who were supposed to love them had come directly from the one person in my family who actually did. In 9 years, Callahan Forensic Services had recovered or traced $3.2 million in assets for our clients. 61 elder financial exploitation cases, 12 corporate fraud investigations, 20 cases involving contested estates and hidden assets. We had contributed to 19 criminal referrals. 14 resulted in charges, 11 in convictions. Not one of those numbers had ever appeared on a Christmas card to my mother. Not because I was hiding it, because nobody had ever asked. That was the thing I had absorbed over a decade of watching my family perform their version of me for every available audience. They were not interested in information that would require them to revise the story. The story was easier than the truth and more satisfying than the truth and had become, by now, so established in the telling that revising it would mean admitting that every version of it had been wrong. So they didn't revise it. They kept telling it. At Easter and at birthday lunches, and at the 4th of July, and at every church potluck where my mother could arrange to be standing near someone who might ask after her children. I built a career in the silence they made for me. I had not been back to Millhaven in 18 months when the calls from Franklin started changing. He called every Sunday at 9, the way he had called every Sunday at 9 since I moved to Columbus. The calls ran 40 minutes on average. We talked about his garden, my cases in general terms, the crossword clue that had stumped him that week, the book he was reading. He asked real questions and waited for real answers, which was a quality I had never fully appreciated until I spent enough time in rooms with people who asked questions as a performance rather than an inquiry. Then the calls started getting shorter. 30 minutes, 20, 15. The voice that came through the phone was the same voice, clear, careful, precise, but there was something compressed in it. The quality of a conversation being conducted in a limited window. He said once, near the end of a 15-minute call, "Dennis has been helping out around here." I said, "That's good." Pause. "Is it?" He said. That was all. He changed the subject immediately. We talked about his garden for 5 minutes, and then he said he needed to go. He had never needed to go before. That night, sitting at my kitchen table in Columbus with a cup of tea and a legal pad, I wrote the date and the time, and what he had said in the space between those two sentences. "Dennis has been helping out around here." Pause. "Is it?" I had been trained to hear what people said in the space between sentences. In financial investigation, the gap between what someone describes and what the documentation shows is where the truth lives. In conversation, the gap between what someone says and what they don't say next is the same territory. Franklin David Callahan had asked me a question in that pause, and the question was not about Dennis. I opened my laptop and searched the Phelps County Property Tax Database. Franklin's farmhouse and 40 acres on Phelps Road paid current every January 1st for 51 years. Current balance owed $14,200. 3 years delinquent. I sat with that number for a long time. Franklin was a man who had kept a paper calendar and sharpened his pencil to the same point every December. He had balanced his checkbook to the cent for 60 years. He had never in his adult life paid a bill late. 3 years. I closed the laptop. I picked up my phone, and I called Marcus. Marcus had been with me for 6 years, and in 6 years, I had never called him on a Sunday evening about a personal matter. He picked up on the second ring, which was how Marcus always picked up, immediately, without complaint, as though he had been sitting there expecting exactly this call. I told him the property tax. I told him the shortened calls. I told him Dennis and Trevor. He said, "What do you need?" I said, "Everything public. Property records, business filings, vehicle registrations, court records. Phelps County and surrounding. Dennis Callahan and Trevor Callahan both. Timeline, 2 days." He sent the first file 48 hours later. Dennis Callahan's landscaping and snowplow business, officially registered as Callahan Ground Services LLC, had filed amended articles of organization 14 months ago. The amendment changed the registered agent from Dennis Callahan to Trevor Callahan. Standard enough, except that the business address had also been changed from Dennis's home address to Franklin's farmhouse on Phelps Road. Franklin's address on Dennis's business filings. I noted it. I kept reading. 2 vehicle registrations in Dennis's name, both within the past 18 months. The GMC Sierra I already knew about. A second vehicle, a late model utility trailer, registered 8 months ago. Both registered to the Phelps Road address. I noted it. I kept reading. The Phelps County Court records produced 3 items. A civil judgment against Dennis Callahan from 4 years ago, $7,000 owed to a former subcontractor. Status, unpaid. A small claims filing from 3 years ago, a supplier. Status, settled. A third item, more recent, a lien filed by the county for unpaid payroll taxes on Callahan Ground Services 14 months ago. Amount, $22,000. I sat back in my chair. Dennis had a company with an unpaid tax lien, a business address that was now his father's home, and 2 vehicles registered to that same address. His father's property taxes were 3 years delinquent. His father's phone calls had shortened to 15 minutes. I was not Franklin's designated financial caretaker. I had no official standing. I was a granddaughter who happened to know how to read the documentation. But I had been a granddaughter who knew how to read documentation for 9 years, and the documentation was reading like every case I had ever opened. I called Franklin the following Wednesday. He answered on the second ring, the way he always answered my calls. His voice was careful in the specific way voices are careful when someone is in the room. "Hi, sweetheart. Hi, Grandpa. Are you alone?" A half-second pause. "Dennis is in the other room." "Okay," I said. "I'll make this quick." I looked at the property tax records. Silence. "I know," he said, very quietly. "Can you tell me what happened to the payments?" Dennis said he'd been handling it. Said he had an arrangement with the county. A pause. "I haven't seen the bank statements in 7 months." Dennis picks up the mail. I wrote that down. Dennis picks up the mail. "Are you comfortable?" I asked. "Do you have what you need?" A long pause. The longest of the call. "I need my pencil sharpener," he said. "I can't find it." We had a code. We had established it 3 years earlier, not because I had predicted this exact situation, but because I made it a practice, ever since my first elder exploitation case, to quietly give the people I loved a signal. Something simple. Something that couldn't be intercepted or interpreted by the wrong person. Franklin's signal was the pencil sharpener. If he said he couldn't find it, it meant he needed help and couldn't say so directly. He hadn't used it in 3 years. He used it now. "I'll find it for you," I said. "I'm going to need a few weeks." "Take the time you need," he said. "Just don't wait too long." "I won't." "Good." And then, in a quieter voice, almost a murmur, "You were always the one who read the numbers right." I held the phone after we hung up, sat at my desk, and did what I always did at the beginning of a real case. I opened a new file folder. I labeled it with a number, not a name. That was habit, professional distance. Then I put the label aside and wrote his name on the tab. Franklin. Then I called my attorney. Her name was Carol Denning, elder law, Franklin County, Ohio, whom I referred cases to regularly and who referred them back when the investigative work was done. I told her the situation, my relationship to the subject, the preliminary findings, the fact that I could not be the lead investigator on an official filing because I was family. She said, "Do you want to come in?" I said, "I want you to refer me to the best elder financial exploitation attorney in Phelps County." She gave me a name, Robert Hale, 22 years in elder law, Mansfield, Ohio, 20 minutes from Mill Haven. I called Robert Hale the next morning. Over the following 3 weeks, Marcus ran the full financial investigation. We subpoenaed nothing. We didn't have the authority to subpoena anything. What we did was build the most comprehensive picture of publicly available records that could legally be assembled by a private firm. Franklin's property was in his name alone. No transfer of deed, no quitclaim, nothing recorded. The farmhouse and 40 acres were still legally his. But Dennis's business had the Phelps Road address on its filings. Trevor's name was on the LLC as registered agent. And when Marcus contacted a source at the county assessor's office, a professional contact, publicly available inquiry, he confirmed that 14 months ago, someone had submitted a request to redirect the property tax bill from Franklin's address to a P.O. box in Mill Haven. That P.O. box was registered to Callahan Ground Services. The tax bills were being rerouted away from Franklin to Dennis's company mailbox. So Franklin wasn't seeing the delinquency notices. He didn't know how far behind they were. He thought Dennis had an arrangement with the county, because Dennis had told him so, and he had no way to verify it because he wasn't seeing the mail. 3 years of delinquency, $14,200. Robert Hale reviewed our preliminary findings on a Tuesday afternoon. He said, "This is enough to open a formal inquiry under Ohio's Adult Protective Services statute. Do you want me to file?" I said, "Not yet." He looked at me. "My grandfather sent me a signal," I said. "He knows I'm working. I'm not going to bring this to a boil before he's ready." Robert nodded slowly. "How will you know when he's ready?" I thought about a man who had taught me balance sheets at a kitchen table, who sharpened the same pencil to the same point every December, who had asked me a question in the gap between two sentences on a Sunday evening and trusted me to hear it. "He'll tell me," I said, "in his own way. He always does." The signal came on a Sunday in April, 6 weeks after the phone call about the pencil sharpener. I had been driving to Millhaven every other weekend, not going to the farmhouse, just being close. Staying at the Comfort Suites on Route 30, eating at the diner on Main Street, driving past Phelps Road slowly enough to observe the property without stopping. The garden was untended. Dorothy's herb bed along the south fence was overtaken with clover and crabgrass. The downspout on the north side of the house had separated from the gutter and was bent at a 45-degree angle, draining water directly against the foundation. The farmhouse itself was sound. Franklin had maintained it meticulously for 50 years, but the lack of routine attention was visible in the small things. The porch railing needed paint. The driveway gravel had scattered and not been raked back. Small things, the kind of small things that accumulate when the person responsible for them has been gradually relieved of responsibility for them. Dennis's truck was in the driveway every Sunday morning when I drove past. Trevor's truck appeared every Tuesday and Thursday. Neither of them lived there. They visited with the frequency of people who are monitoring something they have an interest in. On a Sunday in mid-April, I was at the Main Street diner when my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. One image attached. I opened it. A photograph of a grocery receipt, taken at an angle, slightly blurred at the edges. On the back, written in pencil in the careful, compressed handwriting of a man with arthritis, who had once been meticulous with a mechanical pencil, 3 words. "I'm still here." Our code. 3 years ago, when we had established the pencil sharpener signal, I had asked Franklin, "And if things are okay, what will you tell me?" He had thought about it for exactly 1 second. "I'll tell you I'm still here," he said, "because if I'm still here, I can still fight." He was still here. He was ready. I paid for my coffee, drove back to the Comfort Suites, and called Robert Hale. "He's ready," I said. "How fast can we move?" Robert had been ready for 3 weeks. The formal Adult Protective Services referral was filed that Monday. Robert submitted our investigative summary, Marcus's public records work, the rerouted tax bills, the business address change, the delinquency timeline, as supporting documentation. APS assigned an investigator named Patricia Walsh by Tuesday. Patricia had 14 years in elder services in Phelps County, which meant she had seen exactly this pattern enough times to know it on sight. She visited the farmhouse on a Thursday, introduced herself to Franklin as a routine wellness check. Dennis was not there. Trevor was not there. Franklin sat across from Patricia at the kitchen table where he had once taught me balance sheets, and he told her everything. The diverted mail, the missing bank statements, the property tax bills he had not seen in 3 years, the vehicle registrations to his address without his knowledge, the 7 months without seeing a deposit slip from his own account. Patricia Walsh called Robert Hale on Friday. She said, "We have enough." I spent the following 2 weeks building the folder. Not for APS, they had their own documentation. For the meeting, the family meeting that Robert Hale had arranged at his office in Mansfield, to which Franklin had requested that the full family be present. All of them, my mother Patrice, Dennis, Trevor, and me. I had not been to a family gathering in 18 months. I was going to this one. I worked late every evening at my office on East Broad Street. Marcus had compiled the public records. Robert had received the APS investigative summary under proper disclosure. I built the narrative layer, not the legal argument. That was Robert's work, but the financial picture, the timeline, what the numbers said and when they started saying it. 3 years of diverted tax bills, 7 months of controlled mail access, a business address change that used Franklin's property as a registered location without his knowledge or consent. 2 vehicles registered to his address, also without his knowledge or consent. A tax lien on Dennis's company that had been filed 14 months ago, around the same time the business address was changed to Phelps Road. The picture was clear. Dennis had been in financial trouble for years, and had been using Franklin's good name, good address, and good credit history as a kind of infrastructure. Not stealing from the account, at least not yet, or not in a way Marcus's public records work could document, but positioning, building the architecture of access, so that when the moment came, the mechanism was already in place. Franklin's property tax delinquency had now crossed the threshold that triggers a county notification. In Ohio, after 3 years of delinquency, a property can enter foreclosure proceedings. Franklin's farmhouse, 51 years on Phelps Road, Dorothy's garden. The kitchen table where I had learned to read the truth underneath a document was 6 months from a county auction. I put that number on the last page of the folder, not as a dramatic conclusion, as a fact. Then I put the grocery receipt in a small clear sleeve and placed it at the very front of the folder. Before the records, before the timeline, before any of the professional documentation, because the first thing I wanted the room to see was the reason we were all there. 3 words in pencil on the back of a grocery receipt from a man who sharpened his pencil to the same point every December for 60 years and had trusted his granddaughter, long before she gave him any reason other than a kitchen table and an open ledger, to read the truth underneath the numbers. I'm still here. Robert Hale's office was in a brick building on Diamond Street in Mansfield, 2 blocks from the county courthouse. Conference room on the 2nd floor, a round table with 6 chairs, a window overlooking the parking lot. Afternoon light coming in flat and grey. I arrived at 1:30. Robert was already there. Patricia Walsh from APS arrived at 1:40 in a state vehicle, the manila case file in a leather portfolio. We had 15 minutes before the family. Robert looked at the folder I set on the table. You sure you want to lead with the receipt? Yes, I said. He didn't push it. He understood the structure. My mother arrived first. She came in with the expression she had been wearing at family gatherings my entire adult life, pleasant, slightly aggrieved. Arranged for an audience. She saw me at the table and the expression shifted by exactly 1 degree. Nora, as though the single word required effort. Hi, Mom. She Saturday. She looked at Robert, at Patricia Walsh, at the leather portfolio and the folder on the table. She pulled her purse onto her lap, which was what she did when she felt she needed something to hold. Dennis came in behind her with Trevor. Dennis was wearing his good jacket, the charcoal one he wore to things he considered official. Trevor was in jeans and a flannel that had a company logo on the chest. Callahan Ground Services. He had worn his employer's name to a meeting he did not yet know was about his employer. They Saturday, 6 people around a round table in a grey afternoon. The kind of room where the truth has no upholstered furniture and nowhere to arrange itself comfortably. Robert opened. Thank you all for coming. Franklin requested this meeting specifically. He wanted his full family present. He asked me to start by having Nora share something. They all looked at me. I opened the folder. I took out the clear sleeve with the grocery receipt, and I set it flat on the table in the center, where all of them could see it. My mother leaned forward slightly. Dennis looked at it without expression. Trevor looked at it and looked away. This is a grocery receipt, I said. My grandfather photographed the back of it and sent it to me 6 weeks ago from a number I didn't recognize. He photographed it because it was the only communication method he had available that Dennis and Trevor didn't control. Dennis said, "What does that mean, that we controlled?" "The back of the receipt," I said. The same level voice I use in every interview room, has 3 words written in pencil. I turned the sleeve over so the writing faced up. I'm still here. I read it without inflection. That was his signal. It means he's ready. It means the situation had reached the point where he needed outside help and couldn't ask for it directly. My mother had her hands folded on the table now, very still. I turned to the next page of the folder. Phelps County Property Tax Records. I slid the page to the center. Franklin's farmhouse and 40 acres on Phelps Road have been delinquent for 3 years. $14,200 outstanding. The delinquency notices were not reaching Franklin because 14 months ago, the county's notification address for the property was changed to a P.O. box registered to Callahan Ground Services, LLC. Dennis opened his mouth. That's just administrative. I was managing. The articles of organization for Callahan Ground Services were amended 14 months ago, I said. The registered business address was changed from your personal address to 4418 Phelps Road. That is my grandfather's address. Neither of those changes was disclosed to Franklin. Trevor's jaw tightened. 2 vehicles are registered to Phelps Road, I continued. A 2022 GMC Sierra and a utility trailer, both in Dennis's name. Franklin was not aware these registrations used his address. That's just practical. It was easier. There is a tax lien on Callahan Ground Services, I said. Filed 14 months ago. $22,000 in unpaid payroll taxes. I set the page on the table. That lien was filed at approximately the same time the business address was changed to Franklin's property. The room was very quiet. Patricia Walsh set her portfolio on the table and opened it. My name is Patricia Walsh, she said. I'm an investigator with the Phelps County Adult Protective Services Unit. I visited Franklin Callahan on a wellness check 11 days ago. He provided a voluntary statement at that time. She removed a document from the portfolio and placed it on the table. Mr. Callahan states that he has not seen his own bank statements in 7 months, that his mail has been collected by Dennis Callahan during that period, that he was not aware of the business address change to his property, that he was not informed that the property tax bills were being redirected, and that he did not knowingly consent to the registration of vehicles to his address. Dennis looked at the document, then at me. His expression had moved through several stages in the past 6 minutes, and had arrived at something that looked, for the first time, like fear. I was helping him, Dennis said. He needed someone to manage things. He couldn't keep track. He is the man who balanced his checkbook to the cent for 60 years, I said. He has never been late on a bill in his adult life. He filed his own taxes until he was 72. He is sharp, he is capable, and he has been systematically prevented from accessing his own mail and financial information for 7 months. My mother's hands were still on the table. She was looking at Dennis the way you look at someone you have been defending for years, and have just understood you should not have been defending. Dennis, she said, quietly. One word. He didn't look at her. I reached the last page of the folder. In Ohio, property that is delinquent for 3 years becomes eligible for county foreclosure proceedings. Franklin's farmhouse enters that window in 6 months. I set the page down. Dorothy's garden is on that property. The kitchen table where Franklin taught me to read a balance sheet is in that farmhouse. The pencil sharpener, he's used for 40 years, is in the top drawer of the desk in the study. In 6 months, without intervention, that property goes to auction. Trevor looked at the table. Dennis looked at his hands. Robert spoke. We are here today because Franklin requested it, because he wants to resolve this with his family present rather than in a courtroom. But I need to be clear about what resolution means. He looked at Dennis. The property tax arrears will be paid in full before the end of this month. The business address of Callahan Ground Services will be amended to remove Phelps Road within 30 days. All vehicle registrations using Franklin's address will be corrected. Mail delivery to 4418 Phelps Road will revert to Franklin's sole control. He set a document on the table. A financial management review will be conducted by Nora's firm on Franklin's accounts going back 24 months. If unauthorized withdrawals or transfers are found, we refer to the Phelps County Prosecutor's Office. Dennis said, there are no unauthorized. Then the review will confirm that, Robert said, and we'll close the file. Dennis looked at the grocery receipt in its clear sleeve. The 3 words in pencil. He looked at me. You've been investigating us. I've been documenting what I found, I said. There's a difference. You should have said something. You could have just asked. I looked at my cousin, then at my uncle, then at my mother, who was looking at the table with an expression I had not seen on her face before. Something past embarrassment. Something that had the texture of reckoning. You told people for 10 years that I floated around Columbus doing nothing useful, I said. You said it at Easter and at birthday parties, and at a restaurant, while the whole back room could hear. I've been doing this for 9 years. 93 cases, $3.2 million in recovered assets, 61 cases of elder financial exploitation resolved. I didn't say anything because in my line of work, the moment you tell someone you're watching, the evidence disappears. I looked at Dennis. I waited until I had enough that disappearing wasn't an option. My mother looked at me. Something moved across her face that was not quite what I had been waiting for my whole life, and was also, somehow, closer to it than anything she had said in 10 years. Nora, she said, and then she stopped. She didn't have the sentence for what came after. Some people don't. And you have to make your peace with that. The paperwork is on the table, Robert said quietly. Shall we get started? Dennis signed the agreement at the table that afternoon. Robert had him initial every page, which took 11 minutes. Trevor sat beside him in the flannel with the company logo, and said nothing the whole time, which was the most honest thing Trevor had done in the past 18 months. Marcus ran the full financial review over the following 3 weeks. What he found was not the large-scale theft I had been bracing for. It was subtler, and in some ways more insidious, because subtle is harder to call by its right name. 14 withdrawals from Franklin's account over 8 months, each under $500, each described as household expenses. Total, $4,600. The withdrawals had been made at an ATM in Mill Haven by someone using a card that had been issued to the account as a secondary card. A card Franklin had not requested and had never seen. That card was in Dennis's wallet. Robert filed the documentation with the Phelps County Prosecutor's Office. The prosecutor reviewed it for 2 weeks and then offered Dennis a deferred prosecution agreement. Full restitution of the $4,600 within 90 days, a 2-year period of good behavior, and no further contact with Franklin's financial accounts. Dennis's attorney advised him to accept. He accepted. The property tax arrears were paid within the month, as the agreement required. $14,200, wired from Dennis's business account. Robert confirmed receipt, and the county lifted the delinquency status. The business address was amended. The vehicle registrations were corrected. The mail delivery reverted to Franklin's sole control. Patricia Walsh from APS closed her case file with a notation of resolved, voluntary compliance. It had taken 4 months from the grocery receipt to the signed agreement. 4 months, 93 pages of documentation, and one very short, very clear message in pencil on the back of a grocery list. I went to Mill Haven on the first Sunday in June. I drove the 4 to 5 minutes with the windows down, the Ohio countryside going green and open the way it does in early summer, the kind of landscape that looks like it has all the time in the world and is not wrong about that. I pulled into the driveway on Phelps Road. The downspout had been repaired. The gutter was back in place. The driveway gravel had been raked. I did not know who had done these things and did not ask. I walked up the porch steps. Knocked twice. Franklin opened the door. He was wearing the green sweater he wore on Sundays, the one Dorothy had given him the last Christmas she was well, that he had been wearing on Sundays ever since as a kind of quiet conversation. He looked at me with the expression of a man who had been waiting for exactly this visit, and had decided some time ago not to waste energy on impatience. "You're late," he said. "I know," I said. "I had a case." He stepped back from the door to let me in. The kitchen smelled like coffee, and old wood and the particular clean smell of a house that has been aired out and set back to rights. The table was the same table. The mechanical pencil was in the cup by the notepad where it had always been. The pencil sharpener was in the top drawer of the desk in the study, exactly where it had always been, because it had never been lost, not really. He poured 2 cups of coffee and set them on the table and sat down across from me, and for a moment we didn't say anything, which was how we had always started things. Then he slid something across the table. A page from the Sunday paper. The crossword, half finished, the pencil laid across the top. "I saved this one for you," he said. I picked up the pencil. We worked in silence for a while, just the scratch of pencil on newsprint and the coffee going warm between us and the Sunday morning sounds of Mill Haven coming through the kitchen window. Lawn mowers. A car passing on Phelps Road. Birds in Dorothy's garden, which had been planted again this spring, not by Franklin, his arthritis made it difficult, but by Mrs. Rao from 2 doors down, who had known Dorothy for 20 years, and who had showed up in April with tomato starts and a trowel and 3 hours of her Saturday. Some things get tended by the people who love them, whether or not they are asked. I tapped a clue with the eraser end of the pencil. 11 across. 9 letters. What you carry when you've been underestimated. Franklin read it. He was quiet for a moment. Evidence, he said. I filled it in. He watched the letters go down. That's the one, I said. He looked at me over his coffee cup with the expression he had been giving me since I was 12 years old at this same table, the expression that meant, you already knew the answer. You just needed to say it out loud to make sure it was right. My mother called me the following Wednesday. She did not begin with an apology. I did not expect her to. She was not built for apologies the way some people aren't built for cold mornings. They can survive them, but they don't move naturally through them. What she said instead was, I told Donna at church what you do for a living. Donna was the woman she had told, at a church potluck 3 years ago, that I sat in Columbus doing Lord knows what. What did she say? I asked. She said she wished she'd known. Her mother had the same thing happen 2 years ago. A nephew. A pause. I told her she could call you. I was quiet for a moment. Tell her to call me, I said. Okay. Another pause. I didn't know, my mother said. Not as an excuse. As a fact. I didn't know what you were doing. You didn't ask, I said. Not harshly. Just the truth, said plain. No, she said. I didn't. The call ended without resolution and without ceremony, which was, I understood, the honest version. Resolution is not a single conversation. It is a series of small choices made over time toward something better, and my mother had made one of them on a Wednesday afternoon, which was more than I had expected and enough to work with. Here is what I know now. When a family decides you are nothing, they are not describing you. They are describing the limit of what they can see. And what they cannot see, what you are building in the years they spend mocking the silence, is not their business until the moment it becomes exactly that. I built a career out of finding the truth underneath what people present. 9 years. 93 cases. $3.2 million that went back to the people it belonged to. 61 families that got the truth instead of the version someone had been maintaining for their own benefit. The 94th case was personal. It was the hardest and the fastest and the most important, and it started with 3 words written in pencil on the back of a grocery receipt by a man who had been waiting 3 years for his granddaughter to be watching. I was watching. I have always been watching. Some things you learn at a kitchen table when you are 12 years old. Some things you spend 9 years getting good enough to use. And some things, the 3 words circled at the bottom of a grocery receipt, the pencil sharpener in the top drawer where it has always been, the crossword saved on a Sunday morning because he knew you were coming. Some things you carry your whole life and never put down. I'm still here. That's Franklin's story. And Nora's. 1 receipt. 3 words. 9 years of being underestimated, put to work in the most important case I ever worked. If someone in your life is being isolated from their own finances, if mail is being collected by someone else, if bank statements have stopped arriving, if the bills that were always paid on time have suddenly gone quiet, pay attention. Those small things are not small. And if you have been the one your family dismissed, the one they talked about while you were building something they couldn't see, keep building. The evidence accumulates whether they are watching or not. Drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from. I read every one. Subscribe to Sweet Payback Stories. A new quiet story every week. I'll see you in the next one.